What are the best Xilonen teams? Xilonen is very similar to Kazuha and is often used in teams that originally had Kazuha. These teams are usually a side grade or slightly better depending on the enemies you are fighting. Most of Xilonen's teams are often Kazuha's best teams, but with Xilonen in place of Kazuha, as both are quite similar in terms of gameplay. However, there are some things that Xilonen does better than Kazuha. Xilonen's elemental skill decreases the elemental resistance of enemies similar to Kazuha. Although the resistance decrease that Xilonen provides is less than Kazuha's 40%, the activation is much simpler and easier in Xilonen's case. With Kazuha, you have to swirl a specific element to decrease its resistance, but Xilonen doesn't need to trigger any reactions. Her resistance decrease occurs when she maxes her Night Soul points while having the corresponding element in the team, and that's it. Activating her debuff is very simple and you have less chance to mess it up, unlike Kazuha where you could accidentally swirl the wrong element and you can at most swirl 2 elements at a time to decrease their resistance, while Xilonen can decrease the resistance of 3 elements. Additionally, some enemies have an element permanently applied to them that cannot be removed. Against those enemies, Kazuha is essentially useless because he cannot swirl any other element and he cannot give his buffs either. Xilonen on the other hand does not face this problem as she can still decrease the resistance. Moreover, her resistance decrease lasts twice as long as Kazuha's. Although Xilonen is often a side grade in most Kazuha teams, she can do some things that Kazuha cannot. She can be used in teams where Kazuha struggles to provide his buffs. Most importantly, Xilonen buffs and debuffs also apply to Geo, which Kazuha's skill doesn't affect as Geo cannot be swirled. This gives her a major advantage over Kazuha. Now that we have discussed the similarities and differences between Xilonen and Kazuha, let me give you 5 teams that benefit the most from having Xilonen instead of or alongside Kazuha. Hu Tao got quite the boost with Xilonen because previously most of Hu Tao's teams only consist of one pyro character and that was Hu Tao herself, and on those teams there was no way to swirl pyro in those teams because you either had to use Hu Tao's skill or her elemental burst and that would be a huge damage loss, so Hu Tao didn't get to benefit from Kazuha's insane damage buffs. But now with Xilonen, she doesn't have that kind of restrictions and can easily resistance shred the enemies. Also in Hu Tao vaporized teams, you will have other Hydro sub DPSs who can also do quite respectable damage, and Xilonen also buffs them as well, so they will also do increased damage alongside Hu Tao. So Hu Tao teams did show a big improvement, and the strongest Hu Tao team with Xilonen will be Hu Tao, Xilonen, Yelan and Furina. This will be the best Hu Tao's charge attacking team, but in my opinion, plunging Hu Tao team with Xianyun and Furina and Yelan will be slightly better than the Xilonen team, especially if you have C0 Hu Tao. Arlecchino is obviously a very powerful character and she already has some very powerful teams with Kazuha and Bennett, but with Xilonen's introduction, she gets another major boost. So Arlecchino's best teams are either a vaporized team or a pure raw pyro damage team, and I personally like the raw pyro damage team better because Arlecchino doesn't proc vaporize that often, and when she does, it's good damage, but in a raw pyro team, you will get more consistent damage and there are more ways to buff her pyro damage. So most of Arlecchino's teams consist of Arlecchino, Bennett and Kazuha, and the fourth slot can be anyone. You can use Zhongli or Xiangling for a raw pyro team, or you can use Yelan, Xingqiu or Furina for a vaporized team, but if you replace them with Xilonen, you will still get a mono pyro team which will do insane damage. And yes, for my account, this is my best Arlecchino team, even better than my vaporized team. New Village seems to get a buff whenever any new character releases, and it is no surprise that Xilonen also buffs his damage, but unlike with other characters, New Village doesn't get a very big jump in damage unless you have his first constellation, because C0 New Village doesn't get that big of a damage increase compared to his C1 counterpart. Still, the damage increase is quite nice as you will do an extra 10 to 15,000 damage per tick, which is in reality massive, but this is nothing compared to a C1 New Village. So New Village's new best team is basically his old team with Furina and Kazuha and a shield like Zhongli or Baizu or basically any other character who can trigger any hydro related reaction, but now we can replace them with Xilonen who can trigger Hydro Crystallize to give New Village his passive buff, and she gives her resistance decrease and she also gives a 40% damage increase to the reactions involved, so in this case it will be Hydro and Geo. So New Village as always got a massive buff with Xilonen, and honestly this is no surprise, you should have seen this coming. When Molani was released, she had some major issues with her kit because there were not enough Natlan characters to fully maximize her passive, but now we have Xilonen who can easily fulfill those requirements and also gives major buffs by herself as well. So previously Molani's scuffed best team was Molani, Xiangling, Nahida or Sucrose and any other character. Many used Kachina for the Scroll of Synchronicity artifact set and to trigger Molani's passive, but now you can replace Kachina or the fourth character with Xilonen, who obviously does what Kachina did for Molani previously, but she also gives a 36% elemental resistance decrease, which made Mualani's damage skyrocket as she was already doing crazy damage with Vaporize, and now with the resistance reduction she can do that even better. And now you can use Kazuha in this team also, but I would recommend you to use Sucrose instead of Kazuha because Sucrose can also resistance shred the enemies using the VV set, but Sucrose also gives elemental mastery when she triggers any swirl reaction. So Sucrose benefits Mualani more than Kazuha's raw damage boost because most of the time Mualani will be triggering Vaporize reaction, and having more elemental mastery will result in more Vaporize damage. So yeah, Mualani got a massive buff, and this made Mualani to go from an A tier character to a S tier character. Navia, our boss, she got her most needed buff with Xilonen. So before even Xilonen, Navia was the best Geo DPS character. She was able to do so much damage even before we had a proper Geo support, and now that she got Xilonen, you can imagine how much better she is. So previously Navia was able to do 150 to 200k damage thanks to Furina and Bennett, but now if you put Xilonen in that team, you will increase your damage by at least 30%. Although you are getting more damage, but there is a slight problem in that team as well. So previously in Navia teams, Zhongli was used for his shield and his resistance decrease and for the Geo resonance as well. But Zhongli's pillar was very helpful for Navia as it was a very great source to produce crystallize, which helps in creating Navia's bullets, shotgun bullets, and with those bullets she would do more damage. But now that we are replacing Zhongli with Xilonen in this team, we are not producing that many crystallize reaction. We are still getting enough, but now you have to remember about that and play accordingly. You just can't spam her elemental skill when it's off cooldown. So for this team, her elemental burst becomes very important, so you have to build your Navia with a little bit more energy if you are using this team to get her elemental verse quite consistently. And if you can do that, then this will be the best Navia team. And Xilonen made Navia literally go from a mid A tier character to a S tier character right next to characters like Arlecchino and Neuvillette. So Navia was the biggest winner of version 5.1 with Xilonen as she got the much needed and most deserving buff. And tell me, who doesn't like shooting people with a shotgun? And if you are struggling to build your Xilonen properly, then check out this video and I'll see ya next time.